Hey, Bry Guy here, and welcome to Pixels Refreshed, where art and tech meet. I'm the lead artist at Massive Damage Games for the last 5 years, and I've worked in the game industry for the last 10 years, mostly in Unity, but I'm excited to check out this new Unreal Tech demo by the Coalition. So, let's get into it. Okay. Really nice so far. So obviously you get like these nice organic shapes that were more or less very rare in previous generations. Sometimes they would do something like it, but they would either tessellate it, but most of the time developers will use some flat alpha transparency that they bend around whatever objects rather than have it being legit geometry, whereas this looks like it's legit geometry. The grass here, it looks like it's probably your typical alpha with splines. So it's just like generated splines of flat textures that react and stuff to the wind. I would love to see more of that be geometric in the future, like actually modeled. But the general lighting and everything, the secondary and the bounce lighting is really nice in this. Right away, we're seeing like sub-pixel breakup in these vertical lines right here. So some that tells me that the reconstruction is happening for sure. You only see that kind of specular like instability with reconstruction typically in games. Lighting's really nice here. Having the shadows, that's a nice soft shadow. I'm trying to see if I see any pop in or anything anywhere. A little pop in there in the middle of the ground. Not too bad. Just little rocks. Looks like the shadow pop in distance or something. Reflection's nice on that cube. Seeing a little bit more specular breakup, like the specular highlights, which is the sharp bits of light that you see when you have HDR. It's like the number one thing that makes things come to life. Typically, when you see like HDR on food, on like the Food Network, it's the little specular highlights, or even in like Resident Evil 7 when you have the gore, those little specular highlights are what make things look either really yummy or really disgusting. And it's something that obviously has been more of a recent innovation. This does look like geometry on the side. We are getting a little bit of sub-pixel breakup on the edges. Let's see if I catch anything else. Nice particles. Looks like they've have emitters built with some kind of wind system. I know that Demon Souls remake, John Linneman did a pretty good take on that with the developers where they talked about the wind system they had for directing particles through a scene. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah, really nice particles and light emission. And the bounce light, so this bounce light you see on the side here from the emitted particles, that's a really nice thing. Sometimes when you use specifically emission in games, it's harder to have the bounce light and stuff come properly into the game. So this is like the next gen type stuff. Typically we would use like light probes or all of that to set up our lights in the scene and then get our secondary lights from that. But it's get our bounce lighting from that, or cube maps or something like that. But this is doing it from and usually the downside of that is oftentimes games won't have it for the dynamic elements. It'll be for static lights or things like that, but not for, because most of the time it's baked, right? And then when it's baked, then you would put probes throughout your scene. And then when you've put all your probes all through your scene, I can show that in another video sometime when the Game on Wonder is no longer NDA. But yeah, you set up probes through your scene, and then basically each of those will pick up from whatever your light sources that you've set. But this here, emitting it off of particles and stuff, that'd be hard to do without something like Lumen. Getting a lot of sub-pixel dithering happening, and it almost looks like some kind of reconstruction dithering happening in these elements right here. But beautiful, like. Might seem I'm complaining a fair bit for something that looks 95% photorealistic, but it's really beautifully done. Some of the color grading in the bloom, you're getting a bit of white crush in some of these areas where you're losing value as kind of values crush together. I might just chalk that up to image compression, hopefully, and that when we see the final game, it won't be quite as harshly treated, but overall, really nice. Yeah, good work. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing the game made with it, but it's Unreal 5, so this is all stuff we've seen before with, Lumen and Nanite and Niagara for the particles. So it's nothing entirely new there, but it's nice seeing developers come to grips with it and being able to show real-time demos of these things. This shadow cascade, as it comes up here, is a little dithery. I mean, I'd like to see in like a few iterations of Unreal 5, we have better means of handling some of these shadows. I mean, it's amazing tech. I think Unreal 5 is a pretty massive jump from Unreal 4. I love how they've replaced their proprietary stuff that they were using from NVIDIA and other vendors with Niagara and all of these other things, because it's amazing. I mean, Unreal's a lot more like a playground to play with these days than it used to be. Great. Why don't we check out the other video? So this is the Coalition also released a character rendering test. Okay. So, I mean, from a photorealism perspective, we are seeing some dithering and just kind of almost like subpixel artifacting happening in the fine hairs you can see as the camera moves. So it's like you're losing image stability that you would get in real life with, especially like all of these things on the edge of the head, as basically what happens in the reconstruction is the pixel decides to jump from one whole pixel to the next, or it doesn't have enough information to render it in a specific frame, but it renders it in the next frame. So it just kind of pops in and out of existence, which is something that happens with these kind of details. Looks like we have subsurface scattering in the nose and the ears a bit. It's hard to tell with the lighting that they have, but I mean, obviously they'd want to have that. The most impressive detail is probably like the little fine details in the nose. You see little tiny hairs and obviously pores. The eyes are a little bit more lifelike, but I do feel like this is looking a bit uncanny. It might just be that, I mean, I've seen this kind of drives me nuts, but when the eyes are looking straight ahead, it just looks like a dead person looking past everyone. Typically, when your eyes focus on something, they go closer together when they focus on something close to you. And as that object goes far away, your eyes get further apart. So a character almost always, and I've seen this mistake even in AAA games. Sometimes they'll have the eyes too far apart. And I'm trying to think of a recent AAA game that I saw that in. And it just looks like the character's never looking at anyone. And I feel like that's one area that needs to be improved, the eye tracking of characters, for them to be able to see whatever's straight ahead from them. So it's like you get this weird uncanniness when characters' eyes don't look like they're looking at anything. Good materials like that leather's nuts. And like the little wear that you get. Like this is good texture design, because all of the wear on objects typically happens. It happens a little bit randomly, but most of it happens along the edges. So we get these nice edge wear along here and along here. That's the way materials typically start to wear out. So that's nice. We're seeing kind of like the base geometry over here kind of not hold up, and same with a little bit over here. But for the most part, this is rock solid. Nice kind of like matte metal there. That's nice, that strip of damage here on an asset. But yeah, the wear here is nice. I wonder how many texture layers were used to generate this. I mean, obviously it's probably done in Substance Painter, but it's pretty amazing. I mean, the hope is with, obviously using Unreal Engine now, you won't, in theory, with Unreal Engine 5, hopefully in a few years, people don't have to generate tons of LODs for these characters at different distances. Probably using a fair amount of tessellation in the sides, because I'm not seeing the root geometry as intensely as you would see with PlayStation 4 games. Wow. So, I mean, I'm curious. It doesn't tell us. I mean, it tells us how many polygons are in the body and the face, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily tell us what render resolution or what to expect. There's no way to pixel count this. I would guess on maybe the very first frame you might be able to, but it's so blurry. There's no way that you would do that because typically with temporal reconstruction that needs a few frames that it holds, well, that it looks at a couple of frames and it uses those frames to know how to treat the other frames. But if you don't have that information, then it can't treat those frames. So usually you get the very first frame of a scene where you can count the base resolution. You see Digital Foundry do that all the time. Wait for the very first frame and then pixel count that frame. But I mean, I think from a rendering tech standpoint, we're getting pretty close to rendering humans. I think it's more the algorithms that animate them or make them feel lifelike, or the little subtle animations in humans, like when their eyes move, how they blink, where they look. The more we can automate that and stop animators from having to do that all themselves, the better. So anyways, I think this is all pretty amazing technology. So anyways, I mean, that was my thoughts on this new Unreal 5 tech demo from the Coalition. It's kind of interesting that a first-party studio like the Coalition at Xbox is also using Unreal. It's getting to a point where the making your own engine, it's very hard to keep up from a tools perspective in comparison to using Unreal, especially because there's just such an aggregation of tools in Unreal that to have to build each of these tools yourself, it's like even if you were to build your own engine, you would still be using several middlewares everywhere you can to try to make the load much easier. But it's impossible to do all of this yourself at this point in time. You need to be a massive AAA studio with a complete need for having a unique look. I mean, the nice aspect of having your own engine is you will have a little bit more unique look, although that's less of a big deal than it used to be. I feel like with Unreal Engine 3 games especially, they had a very specific look with how their rendering pipeline worked that always, you look at the game and you'd immediately know that it was an Unreal 3 engine. You saw some cool stuff with like Batman Arkham Knight from the beginning of the PS4 generation, where they just used the processing overhead that the PS4 had and did things with the Unreal 3 engine that in some ways exceeded the Unreal 4's visuals in a lot of games. But that's like a obviously very talented developer at Rocksteady making those kind of decisions. It's kind of hard to do that themselves. So yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have seen like some kind of proprietary engine from the Coalition, but I mean, it's hard when Unreal has got such a strong such a strong pipeline, and the way that you can assemble shaders and stuff is just night and day better than a lot of things at this point in time. So it's hard to get. I think it's Shader Graph that we use there, but it's very hard to compete with them at this point. So I mean, it's interesting to see what kind of hardware we'll need to run this. I'm curious what will happen with the GPU hierarchy when we start seeing Unreal 5 games come to PC. So I was curious after watching that video, Unreal Engine 5 is pretty early, and there's some ways in which I'm curious how this landscape's going to play out. I know that they ditched some NVIDIA proprietary technologies. Like I'm pretty sure most of the base proprietary tech was shifted out when they shifted Niagara specifically, and a nanite and all of that. And it might give us more of a fair playing field. So I'm curious what kind of results we'll see with this. So it's like with this, I mean, it's pretty early on, and I usually like coming to the game GPU because it's pretty easy to navigate, even though it's in Russian. But you get a pretty good sense of where you can kind of see all these hardware things and these cool things. So this is like CPU performance, and you can see when you switch GPUs, whether or not it's like, oh, the AMD performance gets slightly better, the Ryzen performance goes better with an AMD CPU, with an AMD GPU and CPU versus if you use an NVIDIA GPU and an AMD CPU. So there's things like that you can look into. I'm curious what the reasons would be. I mean, it's pretty early with Unreal 5, so it's possible they just don't have the optimizations in yet. But when you look at the GPU performance, this is where it gets pretty interesting. So what I found typically, and maybe I pulled up some examples. So when you look at Unreal Engine 4 games, like literally as soon as I see this logo on this site, when I'm scrolling down, I have an association of what kind of performance to expect from Radeon cards. Radeon cards don't typically perform anywhere near as well in Unreal 4. I find you lose about somewhere between 10 and 30% of your performance just based on being an Unreal game with a Radeon card. So we're looking at, Necromunda. It's like, okay, a 6900 XT is being beaten pretty handily by a 3090, even a 3080. And when you look at comparable cards that I would argue are pretty comparable, like 2070 Super, where is it? 2070 Super and a 6700 XT, 5700 XT, you can see that the 5700 XT is being absolutely clobbered by a 2070 Super, even though their hardware makeup and base performance should be pretty similar. Just drop the resolution, we'll get a clearer indication. 5700 XT, yeah, it's being beaten by a 2060 Super even, 2070, and 3060, all of these cards, 2070 Super. And similar, you can see the 3090, the base 3090 here is being absolutely, is clobbering the 6900 XT in this Unreal Engine game. So when we pull up another one and see how it plays out. So we got Kingdom Hearts 3, similar story. You have the 3090 getting a massive 30% lead here. I don't know what the percentage is over the 6900 XT. Comparable cards like the 2070 Super and the 2070 are absolutely obliterating the 5700 XT down here. So it's and the 5700 XT can't even beat a 1080 here. So this is, when you see this Unreal Engine logo in the game, this is typically the results that I expect. You're going to lose 20 to 30% of your performance. That isn't a hardware-based loss. This is a purely software-based cost to the game, which is one of the reasons I argued with Moore's Law is Dead that it was unfair to put them in your benchmarks without at least mentioning that. It's okay to put them in your benchmarks. And I think Hardware Unboxed has done some good jobs lately mentioning that Unreal games seem to typically favor NVIDIA. So, but they don't give a clear picture. And typically when you see Unreal games, my big problem is it's like a lot of these games have a hard time even getting to 60 frames per second. You look at Necromunda, it's like, in order to get to 60 frames per second, you need what? 3080, 3090? And I would argue Resident Evil 8 Village looks way better than that game does, Necromunda. But if you look, you can get up to 60 frames per second with a 3060 Ti, 6700 XT, 2080 Super. Even a 2080 will take you there most of the time. And, 5700 XT will take you there if you just turn off one or two settings. But we can see in this engine game, this is the RE engine game, that a 5700 XT is actually beating a 2070 Super. So we see them comparing much more identically in this engine, this proprietary engine game, this engine that I would say is much more neutral. You will see sometimes this doesn't work out in the favor, but if we go to another Unreal game, if we see Outriders here, Unreal Engine, as soon as we scroll down to the GPU, you can see right away 3090, it's besting by about almost 15%, 6900 XT. If you look at comparable cards like a 2070 Super, where is it? The DLSS options make it so hard to see. 2070, 5700 XT. So 5700 XT is being beaten by a 2060, 2070, 3060. So even though hardware-wise, I would argue it's the most comparable, and there's probably some cases where one wins and some doesn't, it's being beaten pretty handily by the 2070 Super. Now, the 6700 XT is probably the closest thing we see to the PS5, because obviously I think the 5700 XT was around 9 teraflops, 5700 XT, let's see, it was, so it was around 8 to 9 teraflops, 8 in base, and then boost, it gets to 9.7. So a 6700 XT is closer, you get 11, so 10 teraflops is the PS5, 12 is the Series X. So I'd see the closest GPUs we see to the PS5 would probably be a 6700 XT because of the lack of performance overhead issues on the consoles compared to PC. So anyways, when we look at some of these games, you see immediately, though, this constant trend that we see when we have the Unreal logo pop up, that there seems to be something in the engine that stops you from being able to optimize properly for AMD GPUs. Whereas when you have engines that are made more by the actual studios, they seem to be much more neutral, and you can see the cards play out much more favorably. Even if they're slightly off, they're closer. So like Forza Horizon 4, it's like, let's see, 1440p. You see that 6900 XT is doing well here. There seems to be something bottlenecking Radeon cards at 4K, so they lose a little bit of their advantage. So you see, where is it? 5700 XT, 2070 Super. They're closer. This seems like a fair margin that maybe the 2070 Super is doing something that renders specific aspects of the game better. But when you look at 1440p, things fall pretty much into their normal configurations. You have the 5700 XT slightly somewhere between the 2070 Super or slightly above it, but they're all within, 5% of each other, which is where a fair engine would be to me. The less fair the engine is, the more that I think that we see these results skewed. So anyways, I'm giving Unreal 5 a fair shake. Hopefully things end up being more neutral to hardware. That would be good for all developers. Obviously, they push the graphics bar up quite a bit, which is why the base performance rates, you look at, even to get 30 frames per second in this Value of the Ancients demo, you need 1080 Ti for 30 frames per second. You only have two cards that can even try 60, 6900 XT and 3090. Now, hopefully there's optimizations to come, and there'll be a better way to get the frame rates higher at this resolution, because I would hope most of these games we'd be targeting 1440p 60 on the consoles or whatnot. If you look at the consoles specifically, right, we're looking, remember, somewhere around the 2070 Super, 6700 XT would be my guess. Somewhere between, this is the range. This is the range right here that I expect the fully optimized consoles to be in. And that would put them somewhere around 30 to 39 frames per second in this current iteration. So, obviously this is using a lot of tech. Hopefully there's a lot of optimizations to come to claw this up a bit, or just reducing the settings in certain ways where we can get it where to be almost unnoticeable into 60 frames per second. But anyways, I thought this was pretty interesting. Really cool video. Coalition's doing great work here. I would have been curious to see what it would have looked like in their own engine, but despite that, some really great tech here, and I'm excited to see more what they can do with it. It looks like, I wonder if these objects here. Yeah. Anyways, that's enough for me. Thanks for watching. Hope you like and subscribe if you're interested, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.